Good evening, Mount Olive. We want to start our first day of devotion. And so the devotion that we're going to be going to is in First Samuel chapter 17. You can see I'm right in the middle of it. I'm right in the middle of the battle, right? We are going to be talking about David and Goliath in our devotion. So we want you to turn to First Samuel chapter 17. And of the title of our devotion is going to be facing giants. Facing giants. And we all have a certain amount of giants that we face in our life. Some are different than others, and they're just challenges. They're hurdles. They're obstacles. They're oppositions that we face in our life. So we're going to do a devotion this week of David and Goliath. And so if you'll turn to 1 Samuel chapter 17, we'll get right to it. Framing up everything for us is we see that the divisions for the 5-day study will be number 1, facing our fears. Number 2, being confronted with discouragement. 3, getting prepared for the battle. 4, discerning the voice of the enemy. And 5, the day of our victory. Again, facing fear, day 1, verse 1 through 11, discouragement. Verse 11 through 30, preparation for the battle, verse 31 through 40, voices of the enemy, verse 41 through 47, and the day of victory, verse 48 through 58. Today's lesson, or today's devotion, we're going to talk about the reasons we fall into or give into fear. And second, we're going to talk about being paralyzed by fear. First, why do we give in to fear? And secondly, when fear takes a hold of our heart and our mind, what happens then? Okay, so we find, and you can read the devotion scriptures, but it kind of talks about how they drew up battle lines. And the Philistines. Now, who are the modern day Philistines? Well, that would be none other than the Palestinians. It's in the same area there, and you notice that they're neighboring enemies to the Israelite or the Jewish people. And so even back then, at the time of David, there was this border war between the two. And so we see the Philistines stood on the mountain on one side. And so the battle lines have been drawn. And Israel stood on the mountain on the other side. And there's a valley between them. There's a valley between them, the valley of fear, the valley of opposition, the valley of our giants, right? And so, number 1, why did they give in to fear? Well, they had grown very comfortable. They had grown very satisfied in their military victories over these people. They had pushed them out. They were on the borders of their lands, and they had grown very comfortable with their enemies. And secondly, they had begun to question the leadership, or the political leadership of Saul had began to fall away, begin to chip away. So they had problems in trusting their leadership. They had problems in the spiritual discernment of their leadership, King Saul, and they got comfortable with their enemies. That's a good thing for the church today. One reason that we will give in to fear as a church when we are not sober and alert in our mind and spiritually awake and on guard. Watch, be sober, for your adversary as a roaring lion, walking about seeking whom he may devour. We're not alert. We're not sober. And secondly, there's division in the kingdom of God. And so that's one reason why we will fall into fear. And the same thing in your own life. When you begin to get comfortable with the enemies that you face and the opposition and the devil, and you begin to get comfortable in this world, and you begin to lose your respect and reverence for the leadership of your church, of your pastors, of your spiritual leaders, then you're going to give in to fear, okay? All right. Secondly, look in verse 4. And there went out a champion. There went out a champion. Okay? And so that word actually means a champion of mankind, right? So he is a proven warrior. So I would say he's killed many a man. And he came out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span, a little over 9 feet tall. And so what we find then is not only did the statistics of the size and mass of this man, but the odds were also against the children of Israel, because we learn that he was not alone. He had several in his family that were that large. So he was not the only giant that we find. Of course, David rose up a group of men that were giant killers. I guess that's another devotion for another day. But this giant stood before the people of God, and it seemed like the odds were against them, and that it was most unlikely that they would be able to win. And I tell you, that's kind of reminiscent of the time and the day that we're living in. It definitely wasn't a time of Paul and Peter and the early church through the empire of Rome and Emperor Nero. There are going to be times as a church, there's going to be times as a Christian, there's going to be times as an individual that things come at us in our life and they shake us. And we find ourselves in our room thinking the odds are against us. It's unlikely that I will ever overcome this. When you get to that point and you feel like it's unlikely that I'll ever overcome this, you must be careful, because you could be given in to fear. Okay, it just didn't seem likely. Let's look at the next 3 verses. And he had a helmet of brass upon his head. I guess that's pretty heavy, isn't it? A helmet of bronze or copper, pretty valuable on his head. He was armed with a coat, body armor of maul or scale, like fish or water, so just iron scales, right? And the weight of the coat, or the heaviness of the coat, was 5,000 shekels. 5,000 shekels. Okay, and so I would just say that's quite heavy, right? Quite heavy. And he had bronze armor on his legs, or greaves of brass upon his legs. So I mean, think of the weight of this armor. And a target of brass, or a javelin, right? A javelin, a short sword, a dart of pure brass between his shoulders. I'm sorry, bronze of armor on his legs, yes, and a javelin of brass slung between his shoulders, yes. And the shaft of the spear, so a spear, that's what the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, like a big beam, right? So it's a big old thing, right? And his spear's head, the head of the spear at the end of it, weighed 600 shekels of iron. That just sounds heavy. And one bearing a shield before him. So he had so much armor, he had to have somebody carry a shield, right? And so you see the picture of him in my background. This is a massive man, right? This is a massive man. And so what we find is the giant seemed too big. The giant seemed too big. And isn't that the way it is in our life sometimes? I mean, he was intimidating. And when you get the call from the doctor, and maybe you're facing cancer, or when you get the call from a peer, friend, or spouse, and the problem seems intimidating, and you think, it's way too big, I can't handle it, I'll never rise above it. You could be given in to fear, right? And so let's look at the next number 4. Verse 8, and he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel. So he stood and he shouted. He shouted. And you're going to find later in devotion, he did this day after day, night after night. And all of a sudden, when things begin to churn in your heart and fear begins to take its grip and sink its teeth, the voice of the enemy, the voice of doubt, the voice of it's over, the voice of it'll never work out, it begins to get loud, and it begins to get constant. And somebody today has been giving into the voice. They're at this point, and it just seems like that they're in this world, and all they can hear is the negativity, and all they can hear is the voice of the enemy. All they can hear is the voice of opposition, and they've almost got to the point that they've lost hope. We've got to face our fears. And so here's what happened. Here's the effect of when you get paralyzed by your fears. So I first looked at why we give in to fear. Next, look at what fear does once it begins to sink in. Verse 8, he stood and he cried unto the armies of Israel and said unto them, why are you come out to set your battle in array? Am I not a Philistine? Are ye servants to Saul? Whoa, stop a minute. No, they're not servants to any man. They're not servants to any man. They're servants to God. See what he's doing here? It's the same thing the Babylonian Empire wanted to do to Daniel. He wanted them to change their identity, to forget who they are. Sometimes fear causes us to forget that we are the sons and the daughters of the Most High God. Fear will get you to begin to question your identity. If you're a believer and you've been saved, you're an overcomer. Say that again and again and again. Go to 1 John and read that in 1 John, I believe it's chapter 5. For they who've overcome the world, or how do we overcome the world? It's even our faith. The believers are those who've overcome the world. You're an overcomer. Somebody needed to hear that today. You're an overcomer. You're a child of God. And nothing is impossible with him. Look at second thing. When fear comes in, it says in verse 8, and he stood and cried in the armies of Israel and said unto them, why are you come out to set your battle in array? Am I and not I, Philistine, ye servants of Saul? Choose you a man for you and let him come down unto me. Look at the question. Why are you come out? Why are you even out here? Your kids, your family, your home, it's far away. What's your purpose? Why are you even fighting this fight? And that's what happens to a lot of people in ministry. That's what happens to a lot of people in church when times get hard and the giants seem so big and the odds seem to be against us. And fear begins to sink in. We begin to say, what's the use? In marriages, in homes, in relationships, in jobs, in our Christian walk, in our ministry. What's the use? What is really our purpose? Why are we even doing this? That's what happens when fear sets in. And then look, number 3, he says, if he be able to fight with me, see how sly the enemy is, and to kill me, then we'll be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then ye shall be our servants and serve us. A thing that fear will begin to do in our life and begin to get us to question our ability. I can't preach. I can't do this or that. I could never do that. And a lot of times people aren't saved because of that. A lot of times people aren't saved because they give in to the voice of the enemy and they say, you know what, I could never live it. And maybe somebody's here tonight. Let me tell you something today. You can live it, not by yourself, but through and by the work and power of God. When you get saved, he'll live it through you. Look at number 4, fear. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. And nobody stood up. He spoke against God. He spoke against the people of God, the things of God. He was trying to embarrass and insult God. And yet a man of God would stand up. Think of the time and the day we're living in. Are you willing to take a stand for your Savior, Jesus Christ, who gave his life's blood so you can have heaven? Are we willing to take a stand against the opposition that tries to divide our churches, that tries to destroy our homes, that tries to steal our next generation? What is your conviction? They had lost their conviction. Fear will cause you to lose your conviction. And lastly, fear will begin to get you to question your God or the hope in your God or the salvation in your God. When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and they were greatly afraid. And this word, if you wanted to look up the word dismayed, it would mean they are shattered. They are broken, right? They are shattered. They are broken and they are greatly afraid, in fear, facing fear. You allow fear to come in. The end of it is you begin to question God. You begin to question his power to save. You begin to question that you ever were saved. You begin to question the hope in God, which means life after death, life in heaven. These are the elements or results of when fear sinks in. But I tell you, you don't have to be afraid. Was it not Jesus that said, it is I, be not afraid? Is it not God who spoke the words to Joshua that said, fear not, for I am with thee? Was it not God that said, fear not, for I am with thee? When you pass through the waters, I'll be there. When you pass through the fire, I will be there. Simple message, simple devotion. Let's not give in to fear. Our God is able, our God is able, our God will deliver, and we can face our fears. God bless you today.